My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 36 years old, and my sister thought humiliating my little girl was nothing more than a joke. At a crowded family party, she cornered my daughter in the bathroom and shaved her head, then laughed in my face when I found them. That night, I promised my child I wouldn't let it go, and I didn't. Because every luxury my sister bragged about, the cars, the vacations, the designer clothes, came from a trust fund I controlled. And when I froze her accounts, she finally learned what it meant to lose everything. The evening began with the usual chaos that always hung over our family gatherings, that thick, invisible air of politeness layered over years of grudges and old wounds. Laughter drifted from the living room, plates clattered in the kitchen, and I found myself smiling in that brittle way you do when you already know you'll leave with a headache. But I had no idea the night would turn into something that would make every holiday before it looked tame in comparison. I was at the front door, still taking coats from cousins who arrived late, when my daughter's laughter cut through the house. It was a light, easy sound that always softened me, but it stopped abruptly, replaced by a muffled whimper. I thought nothing of it at first. Children often sulk at these gatherings, too many adults talking over them, too many rules. It wasn't until my niece ran past me, giggling like she'd just witnessed a secret, that my stomach tightened. By the time I stepped into the hallway, I noticed the bathroom door was closed. The faint buzz of clippers reached my ears, a sound completely out of place in a family party. My chest squeezed. I pushed the door open and froze. My little girl sat on the edge of the tub, strands of her soft brown hair scattered around her like fallen leaves. My sister stood behind her, holding the clippers, her face bright with mischief. She pressed one last line down my daughter's scalp, leaving her head bare except for uneven patches. My child's eyes brimmed with tears, her small hands clutched together on her lap, as though she knew crying out loud would make it worse. I could barely breathe. "What are you doing?" The words ripped out of me, sharp and jagged. My sister looked up, smirking, not an ounce of shame in her eyes. "Relax," she said, waving the clippers like they were nothing more than a toy. "It's just a joke. Hair grows back." My daughter's lip trembled. She turned her face toward me, humiliated and broken in a way I'd never seen before. My chest burned with fury, but I couldn't lash out, not there, not with so many eyes waiting to feast on drama. My sister dropped the clippers into the sink, brushed her hands together, and walked past me as though she'd just pulled a harmless prank. That night, my daughter curled into my side, her sobs muffled into my shirt. I stroked her bare scalp, promising her it would be okay, even as a storm raged inside me. The sound of my sister's laughter echoed in my ears, that careless dismissal. She thought it would fade away, that I would forgive her, like I always had. She forgot something important. The cars she flaunted in our driveway, the extravagant trips she bragged about online, the designer bags she flashed at every family event, they weren't really hers. They came from the trust our grandfather left behind, the one he'd built with his own sweat and stubborn pride. A trust fund she could never touch without my approval. She may have believed she stood untouchable in her gilded little world, but every dime she used was tied to my signature. I tucked my daughter in, kissed her forehead, and whispered a promise I intended to keep. I wouldn't scream at my sister or beg for an apology she'd never mean. No, I would give her something far more valuable: silence, followed by precision. For weeks, I acted as though nothing had happened. I answered her texts with the same clipped civility, endured her laughter at my expense, and listened as she gushed to our relatives about her next luxury getaway. She believed the storm had passed. She believed I had let it go. But behind the scenes, I was in motion. I pulled the trust documents out from the locked drawer in my office, reread every clause, every line of legal language our grandfather had insisted upon. I called the bank, spoke quietly with the manager who had known our family for decades, and reminded him of my rights as co-signatory. Each step I took was deliberate, patient, calculated. My sister had humiliated my child, and humiliation was a debt that required full repayment. I waited. I wanted her comfortable, certain nothing was coming. I wanted her convinced she had won. And then the day arrived. She called me one morning, her voice sharp with confusion, then rising with panic. My account's frozen, she said. I just got a letter. It says pending review. Do you know anything about this? I sipped my coffee, letting the pause stretch long enough for her to feel the weight of it. Yes, I said finally. My voice was calm, almost gentle, but underneath it was steel. I pulled my authority. Grandpa's original will allows me to redirect funds if I see misuse. It's all there in black and white. The letter from the bank spread across my sister's kitchen table like a wound she couldn't close. I arrived at her house that afternoon, not because I wanted to comfort her, but because I knew she'd call me sooner or later. And she did, her voice shaking, desperate, pulling me in with the kind of urgency she rarely allowed anyone to hear. When I stepped into her home, I noticed the silence. Usually, she played music at a volume that announced her presence to the entire neighborhood. Today, there was nothing but the occasional rustle of paper as she scanned the letter again and again, as if repeated reading would rewrite its meaning. Her manicured nails tapped against the envelope, her foot bouncing beneath the table. What is this? She demanded. She thrust the paper toward me. It says pending review. It says I have no access to any of my accounts. You know what this means, don't you? Do you have any idea what this will do to me? I stayed by the counter, arms crossed, letting her see I wasn't going to lean into her storm. It means, I said, steady and even, that the money isn't yours. It's the family's. Grandpa didn't leave it for you to waste. He gave us both responsibility, and I finally decided to use mine. Her laugh was sharp, forced, brittle at the edges. You're punishing me over a haircut? Over something that was supposed to be funny? My jaw tightened, but I didn't raise my voice. You humiliated my daughter. You made her cry in front of our relatives, and you stood there laughing while she fell apart. You thought it was harmless. It wasn't. And this, I gestured at the letter. This is what happens when you treat people like props in your games. Her face flushed, and she looked away, searching for words that wouldn't come. She had built her whole life on image. The handbags, the cars, the parties she made sure everyone heard about. Without access to the accounts, all of it would collapse. And she knew it. She tried to rally, tried to pull back her arrogance like a shield. I'll fix this. I'll get a lawyer. You can't just freeze what belongs to me. Read the will again, I replied. It doesn't belong to you. It never did. You've been living in a house of cards, and I just pulled one piece. The fight drained from her face for a split second, and in that moment, I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Not the fleeting kind, not irritation or annoyance, real, paralyzing fear. I left her sitting at the table, staring at the letter as if it were a death sentence. Over the next few days, the fallout began. The first call came from her favorite boutique. I overheard it when I stopped by to drop off paperwork she demanded I sign. Paperwork I had no intention of touching. She was pleading with the manager, explaining that the card must have been declined by mistake. Her voice carried down the hall, desperation leaking into every syllable. By the time she hung up, her cheeks were blotched red. She turned to me, teeth clenched. Do you think this makes you powerful? Watching me struggle. I think it makes you accountable, I said. Then came the missed payment notices. She opened envelopes at the kitchen counter, tossing each one aside as though ignoring them might erase the numbers printed in bold at the top. Credit card balances, car leases, pending charges for trips she had booked months ago, all of it unraveling at once. I didn't need to intervene further. Her lifestyle was collapsing under its own weight, but my silence made it worse for her. Every time she called, demanding explanations, I kept my answers short. Every time she accused me of betrayal, I reminded her that betrayal had started with her actions, not mine. Each conversation ended with her shouting, then crying, then hanging up. And every time, I felt the same cold clarity. This wasn't revenge. It was balance. Word spread through the family faster than I expected. At the next gathering, whispers circled the room before we even sat down to dinner. A cousin leaned in, lowering her voice, so only I could hear. Is it true? You froze her accounts. I didn't confirm or deny. I didn't have to. The truth was already spilling out in the way my sister carried herself. She arrived late, wearing clothes from seasons past instead of something new. Her usual energy, the confidence she wielded like a weapon, had cracked. She avoided eye contact, avoided questions, tried to redirect the conversation toward old stories no one cared about. Then, as if she couldn't hold it in, she snapped. She stood in the middle of the living room, voice sharp enough to slice through every conversation. Do you all know what she did to me? She pointed at me, her hand trembling. She froze my accounts. She's trying to ruin me, destroy everything I've built. The room fell quiet. All eyes turned toward us. I set my glass down, meeting her gaze. No, I said. I'm protecting what Grandpa built. You were wasting it. Murmurs spread through the room. Some nodded. Others looked away, unwilling to choose sides. But I saw the shift, the power she had always held over these gatherings slipping. For the first time, she wasn't admired. She was pitted. Her face twisted, tears spilling down her cheeks. You think you're better than me, she spat. You think this makes you strong. But you're destroying this family. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Her voice broke, and she stormed out, leaving her purse behind on the couch, her shoes scuffing against the floor. After that night, her calls grew more frantic. She begged. She threatened. She offered apologies, so shallow they felt rehearsed. I kept my responses even, never promising, never yielding. I wanted her to sit in the silence she had forced on my daughter. Days turned into weeks. The cars disappeared from her driveway one by one, repossessed in broad daylight. Neighbors watched as movers carried out furniture she couldn't pay off. Packages stopped arriving at her door. And still, she hadn't learned. She called me again, voice sharp with accusation. You're enjoying this. Admit it. I sat at my desk, staring at the trust documents in front of me. Enjoying it? No, but I'm not stopping it either. This isn't over, she hissed. I'll find a way. I always do. Her confidence was thinner now, more like a wish than a promise. I hung up without replying. That night, as I tucked my daughter into bed, she reached up to touch the short strands of hair already growing back. It's not so bad anymore, she whispered. I don't feel as sad. I kissed her forehead, holding her close. Good, I said softly, because she's the one falling apart now. The collapse didn't come all at once. It unfolded piece by piece, like a house rotting from the foundation until it finally caved in. My sister fought it with every ounce of energy she had, but every move she made only dragged her further down. By the third month, her phone calls had shifted from fury to desperation. Please, she whispered one evening, her voice frayed. I can't pay the mortgage. They're threatening foreclosure. If you release just enough for me to catch up, She stopped, struggling to find the right bargain. I'll never bother you again. I'll stay out of your life. Just don't let them take the house. I leaned against my desk, watching the night settle outside my window. That's not how it works. Grandpa left conditions. You ignored them. Now you're facing the consequences. Her breath hitched on the line, and for a moment I thought she might cry. But instead, she slammed the phone down, ending the call with the same sharpness she always wielded when she felt cornered. 2 weeks later, the house was gone. Neighbors watched as movers hauled her belongings to the curb. She stood on the porch, arms folded tightly, chin lifted in an act of defiance she no longer believed in. I drove past once, not to gloat, but to see the truth for myself. The woman who had sneered at my daughter's tears now looked stripped of everything that gave her power. She tried clinging to friends, but that fell apart too. Without her wealth, without the constant stream of gifts and invitations, she had nothing to offer them. Calls went unanswered. Texts were ignored. Her name, once said with envy, now drew only pity or disdain. The final crack came at another family gathering. I hadn't planned on attending, but I knew she would show up, and part of me wanted to see what remained of her. She arrived late, wearing clothes that hung loosely, not tailored to perfection as they once had been. Her hair was unkempt, her makeup smudged, as though she'd rushed to pull herself together but failed. She stepped into the room, scanning faces that no longer greeted her with admiration. The whispers started instantly. A cousin murmured something about the foreclosure. An aunt shook her head, clucking her tongue. My sister's shoulders tightened, but she tried to smile, forcing cheer into a voice that had once commanded every room. It didn't work. Midway through dinner, she snapped. Slamming her fork onto the table, she stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "You all think you're better than me," she shouted, her voice trembling. "You're sitting here, judging me, enjoying my downfall. But none of you would have had the life you did if it wasn't for me. I made these parties shine. I carried this family's name while the rest of you hid in your boring little lives." Her words bounced off the walls, but no one rushed to her side. Not this time. I placed my napkin neatly on the table and looked directly at her. What you carried wasn't the family's name. It was your ego. And now it's gone. Her eyes locked on mine, wild, searching for some crack of weakness. But there wasn't any. I held her gaze until she faltered, her face crumpling as the last of her defenses slipped. She left in silence, and no one followed. After that night, she disappeared from gatherings altogether. Word spread that she'd taken a small apartment across town, one barely large enough for her and her few remaining possessions. She stopped posting photos, stopped boasting about trips or shopping sprees. She became a ghost in the family, spoken of only in half-sentences, her name now carrying the weight of caution rather than envy. As for my daughter, her hair grew back thicker, curls framing her face the way they had before. The shame that once weighed her down lifted, replaced by a quiet confidence. She no longer asked about her aunt, no longer flinched at the memory. That wound had healed, leaving only a reminder that some scars fade while others remain invisible but strong. One evening, as I tucked her in, she looked at me with those sharp, thoughtful eyes. "Do you think Aunt will ever say she's sorry?" I sat on the edge of her bed, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Maybe. But even if she doesn't, we don't need her apology. We've already moved past her." My daughter nodded, rolling onto her side, her face peaceful as she drifted to sleep. Later that night, I sat alone with the trust documents one last time. I closed the folder, slid it back into the drawer, and locked it. Justice had already been served. There was nothing more to take, nothing more to prove.